Today's essay will continue to build upon our three-body problem of the mind series, a meditation on the three irreducible desires we all hold. Hedonism, to enjoy the present moment for yourself. Individuation, to create a better future for yourself. And duty, to create a better life for others. Here we will magnify hedonism by exploring how we cultivate joy for ourselves and how the very tools of cultivation can trap us too. Note that past essays in this series are not a prerequisite for this one. I hope this one brings you joy in this present moment. Let's begin by pausing for a moment and letting our emotions speak to us. I want you to imagine the last time you felt pure joy. Was it a moment on your last vacation? A feeling of gratitude that graced a burdensome day? What were you doing? Were there any particular thoughts going through your mind at that moment? Anything about your past or future? Who was with you? If you were with someone, was it with someone you loved dearly? What were you feeling from those around you at that moment? Without being a mind reader, I'd surmise it was a very specific moment where you didn't have a care in the world beyond drinking in what lay in front of you. When I attempt to conceptualize such moments in my life, I characterize them by my sense of freedom. Freedom from inhibitions stemming from one of three places: my past, my responsibility to a desirable future, and my responsibility to fulfill the expectations of those I care for. Depending on your temperament, those three inhibitions can carry different psychological weights. For example, someone with a strong sense of duty towards others may struggle with enjoying a moment for themselves when the weight of others' expectations rests heavily in their mind. Same for those with a strong sense of obligation towards their future self. I have too many things to do, they tell themselves when given the choice between pursuing their individuation or pausing to enjoy a moment for themselves. And those frequently haunted by their past can struggle with finding these moments when trauma invades any quiet space where joy can live. Hedonism is our desire to free ourselves of these inhibitions so we can find joy in the present moment. Much like how duty can resemble different angels on our shoulder depending on who we prefer to serve and how, hedonism looks different depending on how we relate to our inhibitions. So if joy arises when we are free from our inhibitions, we have two paths to gain this sense of freedom. 1. Internal regulation. Create an environment to remove or reframe our inhibitions. 2. External substitution. Borrow joy from where our inhibitions live. Path of internal regulation. Hedonism, through periodic removal of inhibitions. The former is the path of internal regulation. Like a devoted gardener, the internal regulator watches over his garden and prunes where necessary. Perhaps his tomatoes invaded his herb section, so he digs up the invasive tomatoes to give space for his sweet basil plants. The gardener doesn't hate tomatoes, he just wants them growing in their appropriate place. We too must watch over our minds for inhibitions spreading over into areas where we expect joy to thrive. Like the tomatoes, our inhibitions have a proper place in a balanced ecosystem, we just don't want them crowding our entire mind. This path requires a watchful eye like our devoted gardener. We need an environment where we can watch for inhibition, overgrowth, and intervene as needed. A gardener may walk his landscape every Sunday morning to spot where his ecosystem needs regulation. We too may spend our Sunday mornings perusing our mental landscape to monitor for necessary interventions, perhaps over a quiet cup of coffee. Like the gardener, our goal isn't to remove our inhibitions completely, but to move them to their proper place. There are a few tools we can employ depending on the stage and type of overgrowth we observe. Gratitude, solitude, and forgiveness. Some people's minds are overgrown with inhibitions from a perceived future, restlessness, feeling like everything must be productive or optimized, and anxiety of what the future may hold can all be symptoms of this type of overgrowth. I had a memento made as a daily reminder to point me away from the future and towards gratitude. It reads, "Are you worthy of your possessions?" The message is simple. Stop striving for a moment and ask yourself if you are worthy of what you already have. It gives me a dose of humility and gratitude for what I already have. Am I truly worthy of my possessions if I'm not grateful for them? Others have an inability to enjoy the present moment because their minds are cluttered with the wants, thoughts, and opinions of those they care about. Time spent in solitude, free from the expectations of others, can momentarily lift these burdens by creating room to contemplate and experience what brings us joy beyond satisfying the expectations of others. The hardest part about solitude is finding it without scratching the itch to distract ourselves. Like dumping fertilizer on a weed, solitude can contrarily invite the very inhibitions we wish to remove. This is the case for our third group, those whose minds are burdened by their past. Solitude can invite the past to plague the mind, so this group's antidote is forgiveness. In the past, I've wrestled with the origins of regret, where I argued that regrets are past lessons we haven't yet learned. This may be true when the hauntings of our past revolve around poor decisions we've made, but what of our inhibitions stemming from situations outside our control? Again, the answer is forgiveness, towards ourselves, for not being the version of us who didn't experience bad luck, and towards those who may have inflicted it upon us. Whether we embrace gratitude, solitude, or forgiveness, the mechanism here is less about planting the seeds of joy or complete removal of our inhibitions, and more about reorganizing inhibitions to their proper place. Through this lens, we view inhibitions as valuable parts of our garden as long as they don't grow into the spaces intended to cultivate joy for ourselves and ourselves alone. We just need the right tools to keep each type of plant in its proper place. Path of neglect, hedonism through borrowing from sources of inhibition. Sometimes we let our gardens grow without proper intervention. This leaves us with an overgrowth of tomatoes and little basil. What we do in this situation depends on how we relate to our past, future, and others. Debauchery or reaping what wasn't sown. Ah, debauchery. Bad by just about every health measure, and yet, many of us still partake. One could argue that its badness by every measure means it's actually good for the soul from time to time. My father always described debauchery as borrowing happiness from the future, and it feels quite fitting for those of us blessed enough to have experienced a hangover or slept with someone we regretted while our inhibitions were masked. In most instances, we create space for joy to bloom in our garden, but some may find themselves reaping as soon as it sprouts. A sophomoric, even callous argument could be that this behavior is derived from an absence of will or an inability to delay gratification, but it has more to do with overgrowth. Inhibitions from either past decisions, the expectations of others, or future responsibilities choke out the present before it can sprout joy. So it becomes entirely logical to reap the trace amounts that may appear with each weekend plan that presents itself. The net result is a sauce with just enough basil to keep us making that same sauce over and over again until the garden lies barren of basil altogether. Reminiscence or spending past reserves. Reminiscence is another source of joy. It's when we gather the lads to have a proper laugh over the good old days. Or it can look like watching an old movie to relive how it made you feel during a time when joy grew plentifully in your garden. When we are blessed to have an abundance of joy, we may bottle it up and freeze-dry it for later. This gives us a limited supply we can access at a later time, but it's not quite the same as freshly grown. We can tell the difference between a sauce made with fresh herbs and freeze-dried ones. We can responsibly use our limited supply so long as we do the work to grow a fresh supply. One way to do this is through what many call the inner child exercise, asking yourself what 10-year-old you would enjoy doing right now. A pleasant realization can come from this exercise. We are still that child with those same joys. Our garden can support enjoyment of the present. Of course, this must be an exercise rather than law, since our prefrontal cortex wasn't fully developed when we were 10. When I was that age, I enjoyed creative writing, which led me to this essay, but I also wanted to play video games for hours at a time. Sorry, bud, but I'm not doing that anymore. Duty calls. Some may find the seduction of reminiscence irresistible to the point they become stuck in the past, replaying old pleasure over and over again. They forget that the best is yet to come, always, so they begin deriving all their joy from their memories or even fabrications of simpler times. I could point to countless examples of people on the internet with dwindling supplies of joy, people pining for a rose-tinted past that never even existed. Vicariousness, or substituting others' joy for our own. Surrounding ourselves with the people we love is an objective source of joy, but on the other edge of that sword sits the anxieties and stress derived from their expectations. Or as a man much wiser than me said, "Every sweet hath its sour." Ralph Waldo Emerson in compensation. It is undoubtedly joyful spending time with our loved ones, but danger lurks when this approach becomes a crutch. Perhaps we attend several pasta nights with our friends, but we always bring the wine. The host's sauce has just the right amount of sweetness, derived from the basil in the host's garden. but we never see the ingredients since the sauce has been cooking all day. When we try to enjoy a similar meal on our own, we find our homemade sauce to be sour because basil doesn't grow plentifully in our garden. We just get to enjoy the basil growing in our friend's garden. If our joy only arrives vicariously through others, we mistakenly believe the sauce of solitude tastes sour because it isn't shared with loved ones when the issue lies in how we've cultivated our garden. This is a bleak place to be. I learned this the hard way when I moved to a new city just before the COVID-19 pandemic struck. Forced isolation taught me that my joy was largely derived from spending time with those I cared about in my past city. It led me to wrestle with my identity and question how I tended to my garden. I learned that cultivating some basil for yourself and yourself alone is valuable, because at some point the party must end. Conclusion. Sometimes we become focused on our obligations to our future self or those around us, and those obligations can bring inhibitions that create an overgrowth in the mind's garden. We are left with one of two paths. The gardener, do the hard work to prune the overgrowth and organize the mind's garden, or the reaper, attempt to extract joy from an environment unconducive to its growth. There is a cruel irony for those who follow the latter path long enough. We fail to experience joy because we cultivate it with the wrong tools. To understand the state of your mind's garden, I leave us with a few questions to meditate upon. Where do we feel the most inhibition? From the weight of our past, future, or others' expectations? What do we innately find enjoyable? Can we find this by asking our 10-year-old self what to do? What does our relationship with our inhibitions look like? Like a diligent gardener, carefully cultivating his space, or a complacent one accepting whatever the environment might grow?